Innovation Stage. I'm happy to announce the next presentation because this is one of the subjects that I've really looked at intensively myself. It's very important for our industry to look at this and to find solutions here because
So today, different branches of industry are competing amongst each other in order to get the same qualifications. So it's all the more important to find solutions. The knowledge that is lost needs to be preserved, needs to be saved, and needs to be transferred into new tools. I'm looking forward to great2know because they set their sights on digitized processes and turn individual know-how into collective capital. And it sounds a bit complex, but we've got somebody to explain how this works. We've got Christine Lutz with us, Managing Director and CSO of great2know GmbH. Thank you very much for this introduction. I'm happy to be here. So I'm not going to be talking about machines. I am going to talk about knowledge. So the knowledge that's in the minds of people is to be safeguarded, and we want to shape the future with it. We've developed a great platform with the help of which this can be done. And know-how, knowledge is the basis for everything. You probably know the former CEO of Siemens who said in the 80s, if Siemens knew what Siemens knows, then Siemens would be rich or unbeatable. And I think that this name, Siemens, could be replaced by any other company name here at EMO. Why is the topic of knowledge so important, as important as never before? That's because 30% of the workforce will retire by 2036. And looking at the audience here at EMO, it reflects this figure, because specifically in machine tool building was really made successful by the baby boomer generation, and this generation is going to retire very soon. Furthermore, let's look at the young generation. The young people will not stay 20 or 30 years within one company. They usually stay a lot shorter and then leave for another company. Every time that a person leaves and changes a job, concludes a project, valuable knowledge is lost. It's particularly in mechanical engineering where a lot of knowledge is actually documented, and we no longer suffer from too little information, we suffer from too much information that's buried so deeply in our filing systems that we can't find the right information when we want it. So you spend ages looking for something and can't find it in time. A study of McKinsey says 20% of employees' working time is spent on searching for knowledge and waiting for knowledge. That's an entire workday, so it's really crazy how much efficiency is actually lost. The necessary conclusion here is that sharing knowledge is becoming ever more important. Because, to give you another figure, only 80% or to start in a different way, only 20% of knowledge is documented and 80% of knowledge is stored in people's minds. And surprisingly enough, only 68% of companies have a formal knowledge management. And already today, these costs of losing knowledge cost $36 billion. This is a figure that you really have to digest first in order to understand it. So we have got a silver tsunami in front of us. And these costs that I mentioned, $36 billion, are going to double in the next few years. So think about the implications for machine tool building. building. What are they going to be? Well, the setup times are going to get longer if there are fewer employees, higher scrap rates, longer ramp-up phases if you have new plants, and you will have an increase of unplanned standstills. So in terms of productivity and efficiency, this will mean an enormous cost and loss and enormous costs. Of course, you could say AI is the game changer, because all the documents can be searched by artificial intelligence. The buzzword here would be co-pilot. But only 80%, or as I said, well, 80% of the knowledge is in the minds of the people, and this can't be searched. And as we don't have a USB interface in our heads, and I hope that we will never have that, we need a different solution. We from great2know, a startup from the Hesse, have the right solution. So I worked with Lufthansa for over 20 years with different functions, and in my last job I worked with knowledge transfer. The executive staff that went into retirement, that changed their jobs, were accompanied by moderators, and in a very structured way their experience was queried, documented, and passed on. This method worked really, really well. It was very successful because for all the employees, this meant that there was a lot of appreciation for their knowledge. And when we asked them questions, lots of things were triggered in people's minds and reminded them of what they knew. We worked with the data, and this system could not be scalable, and it was rather costly. Those were the disadvantages. So together with my colleague Bettina Volkens, I founded the startup great2know. We offer, in a platform-based way, access to 80% of the knowledge that's in the minds of the employees. We use the same method, so we ask people questions in a very structured way. We sort them on our platform, and then we make them available to the coming generations, to the colleagues and the employees at large. What's special about this is that we have uploaded documents to enrich all this. Now, you may wonder, what does this empirical knowledge mean? I mean, can't all this be documented? Unfortunately, it doesn't work, because empirical knowledge is the stories behind the decisions, the lessons learned, the shortcuts. Whatever the colleague told me over the coffee break or in the canteen, and this is something that's not documented. If this valuable knowledge, which is the lubricant that makes a job feasible, if we combine this with documented knowledge, then the transfer of knowledge is complete. I've brought along an example from my former world, from Lufthansa. I'm sure you've all flown at some day or time or another. You know that there are these emergency slides that can save lives. And you can probably also imagine that these slides have to be serviced regularly. They have to be rolled out, then people check whether there are any defects, and then they are rolled in again. This process usually lasts about 3 hours. And my example describes Peter, Jochen, and the slide. So technician Jochen has the task of building in and building the slide in and out. And this usually takes 3 hours. But Peter, his colleague, knows how this actually works in 2 hours. The problem is that Peter has been in retirement since Friday, and he didn't document his knowledge. So what possibilities are there? Well, according to the manual, we know that the installation usually takes 3 hours, so this is not an option. You can call Peter in a panic and call him, but he's not available because he's traveling around the world. Or you could just accept that there'll be a flight cancellation flight delays and very high follow-up costs. So these options are not very attractive. In the new world, Peter, before he went into retirement, shared his knowledge with great2know. And in this way, the succeeding colleagues don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I hope you're curious to see how this really worked. And I brought a very short clip with me. That's the blockbuster that I like to show.
Das veranschaulichen wir Ihnen anhand eines kurzen Beispiels. Per Freisprechmodus wird soeben die Frage beantwortet. Welche nicht dokumentierten relevanten Arbeitsanweisungen oder Prozesse, die beachtet werden müssen, gibt es? Antworten können per Freisprechmodus, Video oder Text gegeben werden. Die Antwort wurde erfolgreich gespeichert. Unser great2know Assistant generiert nun automatisch passende Folgefragen, basierend auf den eingegebenen Informationen. Dabei setzen wir auf einen eigens entwickelten dialogischen Ansatz, der die harmonische Zusammenarbeit zwischen Mensch und Technologie in den Vordergrund stellt. Durch die intelligenten, KI-gestützten Folgefragen decken wir tiefliegendes Mitarbeiterwissen auf und gewährleisten eine umfassende und präzise Weitergabe von Expertise. Wir kombinieren menschliche Validierung mit KI-Überprüfungen, um die Relevanz des Wissens sicherzustellen. Ausgewählte Stakeholder können spezifische Fragen gezielt beantworten, um Kontext und Präzision zu gewährleisten. Unser great2know Assistant setzt Ihr erfasstes Wissen in den richtigen Kontext, indem es mit bestehenden Daten verknüpft wird, und macht es dank intelligenter Suche jederzeit leicht zugänglich. Jede Frage wird, ohne Halluzination, mit präzisen Quellen und mit verlässlichen Informationen innerhalb von Sekunden durch einen Experten-Chatbot beantwortet. Unser Tool bewahrt Ihr Wissen, steigert die Effizienz und hilft Ihrem Unternehmen, den nächsten Schritt zu machen. Lassen Sie uns gemeinsam das Gedächtnis Ihres Unternehmens entwickeln.
Ja, unser Film hat gezeigt, wie es
Right, our
funktioniert.
film showed you how it actually works, and what's really important to say here is that we don't see ourselves as a technological company. We think that the human being is at our focus. So we saw to the requirements of human beings. We found out that 90% of people are actually prepared to share the knowledge if you ask them, and that's what we do with our technology. We found out that 70% like to exchange ideas with others, so we can also involve stakeholders, which means colleagues, employees, superiors, to whom questions can be transferred and they can be challenged. We learned that 60% of people prefer to answer questions verbally to writing things down. Of course, you can hand in your questions verbally, and AI will then transcribe and then establish that follow-up questions will be asked. And we learned that 30%, particularly of the baby boomer generation, prefer being supported by a human moderator. And this is something that we cater to also. We've collected very good experience with some renowned companies that you see here on the right-hand side. We have a major pilot project in Siemens. In India, we work together with Knorr-Bremse Schmidt, a subsidiary of Wirth, EWE, Dürr, and Zertbau. So within these major projects, we learned so much and fed all this back into our work. And if you're interested to get to know more about this, please come to Hall 6 and see us at our booth. Thank you.
Sehr stark, Christine.
Yes, great, Christine. That was faster than I expected. Thank you so much. What I thought was really quite intriguing, because I've been dealing with this topic before, that this knowledge can be taken up in this way. How long does this process take? I imagine it must take ages if you really want to ask everyone. Well, I can only give you a legal answer. The legal answer would be, it depends. If you have a young colleague who has been on the job for 3 to 5 years, then it takes 7 hours net. But if you have a seasoned mechanical engineer who has got 30 years of vocational experience and 20 years with a certain machine, then of course this will take a lot longer. And if my answer can be a bit longer, that's an important component. As long as we don't have a USB interface, which we hopefully won't ever have, the company needs to invest time, needs to give the employee time to actually document his or her knowledge, because if we don't do this now, then it'll take a lot longer to find this knowledge, if you find it at all. Okay, well, knowledge transfer, this is something before we had a lack of skilled staff, and in process optimizations, you normally realize that people want to go further and further, or Chinese whispers effect, that you get a totally new process at some stage, but it still works. Why do you think it's so important to do this? Because people could also say, well, we think that AI is just the best and they'll find new ways of doing this. What do you say to that? Answer, well, if you did that, relied on AI, for instance, then you would negate the experience of the baby boomer generation. And this generation tried out so many things. They made so many mistakes. They corrected their mistakes. And this empirical knowledge is the basis for innovation. I don't think that the new generations can do things just as good or better, because as we have seen in many companies, the seasoned colleagues are often asked for their advice, and if they're no longer there, then it's their advice that's going to be missing. Well, you took this all up, but how is this going to be used? Well, imagine I was 30 years younger and came here and didn't have a clue of how a certain company works. And imagine I had an older colleague, but he went to retirement the week before. So how would I be able to use the data from the machine? What's the day-to-day use? Answer, well, there's two options. The system can be asked just as you would have asked Peter, and you would then get an answer, a teaser answer by the system. With the deep dive source, this could be the knowledge transfer or the uploaded document, so that you can read whatever you need to know. Or you have another option. You can have all this knowledge in onboarding documents, and this is going to be the next step. That's what we're going to do next. We're working on it at the moment. So onboarding documents would be compiled that are customized to the person wanting the knowledge. Some prefer TikTok videos, some prefer reading an article, some like their Excel sheets. So it would be customized. That would be my next question. 2 days ago, we had a virtual reality solution where experienced colleagues had these glasses accompany them, and artificial intelligence then used the knowledge of the older colleagues and transferred this knowledge to the younger generation on the basis of images. Is this something that you will do in future too, or are you going to stay with text? Well, at first, the input will stay text-based, but when it comes to the output, we can imagine videos, maybe with virtual reality glasses, because artificial intelligence has so many things. Maybe we don't know what's going to happen in 2 years' time. You've got major partners, you've got a long-standing Lufthansa history. What about these small and medium-sized businesses? Is this a solution that they can use too? Or would you say, well, we'll deal with the big companies first? Answer, well, we actually carry out individual transfers too. with a utility company in Hesse. The director there retired, and the successor only arrived 4 months later. And this is something that we like to solve, this problem, by ensuring that an individual person can be accompanied by us, that all this knowledge is then transferred onto documents and that it can be used. I don't have any other questions. Christina, thank you very much for having been here. It's really a great topic. Maybe somebody amongst the audience has a question. Yeah, okay, but we don't have a microphone, unfortunately, so the interpreter cannot hear the question. Okay, the question was, how do you, what's the acceptance rate with employees? Answer, well, we have quite some experience with younger colleagues, but also with the more experienced colleagues who are almost going into retirement. And once colleagues have dealt with this topic, we usually got the feedback that it's actually fun to do this. But as I said before, we're not a purely technological company. We also do so-called wellness calls, so we don't leave employees alone, but we accompany them regularly over time, and until we do these change measures, we really implement those tasks that the superiors would do. We do the appreciation and all the surrounding program. So you also accompany the change management of the company. Oh, yes, that's interesting to know. Yes, that's absolutely important. Introducing a tool without change management is something that will not work in the long run. So this is something that you should. Thank you very much. Big hand for Christina Lutz. Thank you.